Welcome to you. We're going to take a look today at a court case, Marbury versus Madison. And before we go into it, I think you should have some context. And what do I mean by context? It means what was going on around the country at that time, which made this potential case. Let's take a look at the context. First of all, our first president, as you're aware, was George Washington. George Washington served 2 terms as president. His vice president was a gentleman by the name of John Adams. John Adams, after George Washington did his 2 terms, ran for president and won, and became the second president of the United States. Now, after Adams pulled his 1 term, he decided to run for a 2nd term, and he was opposed by Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr and a few other people. And the way they did it in those days is they threw all these names in a hat, and whoever received the most electoral votes became president. So in this particular case, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied, and John Adams was defeated. The Congress actually determined between Burr and Jefferson who would become president, and that became Thomas Jefferson. Now, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson did not like each other. They just plain didn't. And so they did things to get on each other's nerves. So as part of this, Marbury versus Madison, as you can see here, our petitioner, or the person who brought the case, was William Marbury. The respondent was James Madison, who was at that time Secretary of State. The location was the White House. And this was argued February 11th of 1803 and decided a short 2 weeks later, February 24th of 1803. Now here's the facts of the case. Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams in the 1800 presidential election. Before Jefferson took office on March 4th, 1801, Adams and Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which created new courts, added judges, and gave the president more control over appointment of judges. Now, whenever a president is elected, and they have the election in November, and the time he actually takes office is generally, in today, it's in January, but in those days, it was March. That period between when they had the election and when you actually take over the office is called the lame duck period. And generally, nothing happens in that period, but in this particular case, as you can see, Adams and Congress passed a law, a group of laws, which created new courts, added judges, etc. The act was essentially an attempt by Adams and his party to frustrate his successor, as he used the act to appoint 16 new circuit judges and 42 new justices of the peace. The appointees were approved by the Senate, but they would not be valid until their commissions were delivered by the Secretary of State, who we already said was Madison. And the commission was actually just a formal letter or document which says you officially have this position. And in those cases, in that day, they actually delivered those commissions. Well, William Marbury had been appointed Justice of the Peace in the District of Columbia, but his commission was not delivered. Marbury petitioned the Supreme Court to compel the new Secretary of State, James Madison, to deliver the documents. Marbury, joined by 3 other similarly situated appointees, petitioned for a writ of mandamus, compelling the delivery of the commissions. A writ of mandamus is merely something that comes from the court which says you must do something. In this particular case, they were looking for a writ which says to James Madison, you've got to deliver those commissions. Well, here's the questions. Do the plaintiffs have a right to receive their commissions? Can they sue for their commissions in court? And does the Supreme Court have the authority to order the delivery of their commissions. Well, what happened? The conclusion. As you can see, we have a picture here of some of the justices at that time. We have Marshall, Cushing, Patterson, Chase, Washington, and Moore. Now, here's a conclusion. Though Marbury was entitled to it, the court was unable to grant it because Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789 conflicted with Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution and was therefore null and void. Wow, that's a mouthful, huh? Null and void means doesn't count. The court found that Madison's refusal to deliver the commission was illegal, but did not order Madison to hand over Marbury's commission via writ of mandamus. Instead, the court held that the provision of the Judiciary Act of 1789, enabling Marbury to bring his claim to the Supreme Court, was itself unconstitutional. In other words, he didn't have the right to do that, since it purported to extend the court's original jurisdiction beyond that which Article 3, Section 2 established. In other words, 1789, they created something that was unconstitutional. And this was a theory that something could be unconstitutional, which was new. The Constitution was new. How could something be unconstitutional, and who could say it was? Well, the Supreme Court. Marshall expanded that a writ of mandamus was the proper way to seek a remedy, but concluded the court could not issue it. Marshall reasoned that the Judiciary Act of 1789 conflicted with the Constitution. Now, Congress did not have the power to modify the Constitution through regular legislation because supremacy clauses places the Constitution before the laws. In so holding, Marshall established the principle of judicial review, that is, the power to declare a law unconstitutional. And that's what the Supreme Court does even today. So there it is. It's somewhat complicated, but I think if you get in there and read it through and try to make some sense of it, you can answer those questions. You can do it. Hit it and quit it.